After the family reunion, my bank account was empty and the words my son-in-law said still echo in my ears. "We needed it more than you." I remember staring at my phone, blinking slowly, thinking maybe I had opened the wrong account. The numbers showed zero. Every dollar I had saved over years of careful living was gone. My hands felt cold, but my face stayed calm. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just sat there in silence, trying to understand how a weekend filled with laughter ended in betrayal I never imagined possible. Before I tell you how everything unfolded, I want to pause for a moment and thank you for being here with me. Stories like this are not always easy to share, and they are not always easy to hear. If this story speaks to your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly helps more than you know. And I would love to know from which country are you watching right now. Tell me in the comments. It means so much to see how far these stories travel. I have always believed that a life lived quietly is a life lived fully. Money was never something I flaunted, but something I managed with care. Every dollar had its place. Every expense was deliberate. My name is Loretta James, and for most of my life, I made decisions with patience, thought, and dignity. I was a widow, yes, but I was independent, capable, and content with the life I had built for myself and my daughter. Camille is my only child. From the moment she was born, I knew I would do anything to give her stability and love. I worked hard, saved every spare penny, and provided her with everything she needed, not to impress anyone, but so that she could grow up secure, confident, and kind. She has always been gentle, thoughtful, and incredibly perceptive. Even as a little girl, she noticed things most adults missed: the small struggles of neighbors, the quiet sadness in strangers' faces, the importance of honesty. I loved that about her. When Camille introduced me to Adrian Cole, I didn't know what to think at first. He was confident, articulate, and undeniably charming. He had a presence that made people notice him, but not in an arrogant way. Instead, he seemed to measure his words carefully, always choosing what would make people feel comfortable. The first time I met him, he brought a bouquet of flowers, real roses, not something bought on a whim. "Mrs. James," he said with a slight bow of his head, "I've heard so much about you." I appreciated the respect in his tone. Camille watched him, smiling softly, and I felt a flicker of reassurance. Perhaps she had chosen someone good, someone who would care for her. That evening, over a simple dinner in my kitchen, Adrian spoke about his ambitions, his career, and his plans for the future. He asked polite questions about me, about Camille, about the life we had built. He was attentive, curious, and somehow measured. I remember thinking that he seemed almost too aware of his impression on me, yet I told myself I was imagining it. Over the months that followed, Adrian's presence in our lives grew steadily. He often visited for dinner or to discuss small details of Camille's career, his own work, or just to spend time together. He was always calm, always polite, always careful not to overstep boundaries. Camille, in turn, encouraged me to trust him. "Mom, he only wants to help," she would say, her soft hand brushing mine. Her faith in Adrian reassured me, and for a while, everything was as it should be. But I began noticing subtle things. A question about my savings account here, a suggestion about consolidating bills there. "Mrs. James, you've worked so hard for your money. Have you considered moving it to something safer?" he asked once, leaning slightly forward, his eyes calm, unblinking. "It's just to protect what you've earned." I smiled politely. "I check my accounts regularly. I know my money is safe." He nodded slowly. "Of course. I just want to make sure everything is as secure as possible." "You've done so much for Camille." I believed him. I trusted him. I wanted to believe he had no other motive than concern. Then came the small requests, not directly for money, but for help. "Mom, could you transfer a little to cover a minor expense?" "Just temporary," Adrian would say, almost shyly. Camille would quickly reassure me. "Mom, it's okay. It's just temporary. They'll return it." And I would do it, thinking nothing of it, believing I was helping family. The amounts were small at first, barely noticeable. A few $100s here and there. They were always framed as urgent but temporary emergencies that needed my help. And each time I allowed it, I felt a quiet sense of pride. I was providing for my family. I was being a mother over time. The requests increased. The explanations became more detailed, more persuasive. We're planning for the future, Adrian said once, voice low, calm. We need to make sure Camille's career is supported. You wouldn't want her to struggle unnecessarily, would you? Camille nodded. Mom, he's right. It's just to keep things moving. Don't worry. And I didn't worry. I never doubted them. I never questioned. I wanted to trust, because that's who I am. I have always believed in honesty and the goodness of people I love. Adrian's involvement grew further. He offered to help organize my bills online, to simplify my accounts. He said it would make my life easier. I allowed it because Camille encouraged me, because I thought it was convenient, because I trusted them both. He became the one who knew every transaction, every balance, every small detail. And all the while, it seemed perfectly reasonable, even helpful. Looking back, the small signs were there. The way he leaned slightly closer when explaining why I should transfer money. The way Camille's nod was almost automatic, like she had been trained to affirm him. The calm, measured tone he always used, never raising his voice, never forcing, only suggesting. Each suggestion, each transfer, each request seemed minor alone, harmless even, but together, they formed a pattern. And I, trusting and loving, never noticed. Our family life seemed normal. Sunday dinners, quiet conversations, small celebrations. Camille was bright, kind, loving. Adrian was polite, helpful, attentive. They laughed. They smiled. They presented themselves as the perfect couple. And I, Loretta James, believed in them. I believed in family. I believed that love should shield you from harm. And all the while, the tiny cracks were forming beneath my feet, hidden by smiles, reassurances, and careful explanations. I never saw it coming. Not fully. Not until that one weekend. The one that would change everything. Until then, I lived in calm, quiet trust, unaware that the very people I had opened my heart and my home to were slowly weaving a web around me, disguised as concern, framed as love, hidden in the softest words. I wanted to be a good mother. I wanted to trust my daughter. I wanted to believe Adrian. And in that desire, I didn't notice the subtle erosion of my independence, the quiet manipulation, the first signs of a betrayal that would soon devastate me. I thought I knew my family. I thought I understood love. I thought I was safe. And I was wrong. The morning after a quiet Saturday, I woke to the soft light spilling across my kitchen floor. I always started my days with tea, a slice of bread, and a moment of stillness before the world demanded attention. But that morning felt different. The air seemed heavier, though nothing had changed. Camille had already left for work, humming softly as she prepared for her day, and Adrian lingered, unusually attentive, by the counter. He offered to make the coffee. It's no trouble, he said, smiling with that polite charm that had disarmed me the first time I met him. I nodded, letting him dot a tea first. The conversation was ordinary. He asked how I slept, if I had enough rest, how I planned to spend the day. But then, casually, he mentioned my accounts. Mrs. James, he began softly, I noticed a few small expenses last month. Nothing concerning, but it might be a good idea to review everything. I smiled faintly, brushing it off. I manage my accounts carefully, Adrian, I said, still seated at the table, tea cooling in my hands. He leaned closer, not aggressively, but in that quiet, measured way that made me feel I should listen. Of course, he said. I just want to help you protect everything you've worked so hard for. You've done so much for Camille, and I'd like to make sure nothing goes unnoticed. I appreciated the sentiment. I did, but somewhere deep inside, a small flicker of unease stirred, though I ignored it. Camille from the doorway smiled reassuringly. Mom, it's okay, she said softly. He's just trying to help, nothing more. And so the day passed. Adrian spent the morning organizing my bills. He explained the steps as if I were unfamiliar with my own accounts, guiding me gently, repeatedly reassuring me that this would make my life easier. I nodded along, trusting him. It seemed innocent, helpful, and Camille's presence made the unease fade into the background. But subtle patterns began forming, almost imperceptible at first. Small suggestions about how I could improve my accounts, gentle nudges about what to transfer or what to save. Each suggestion seemed reasonable, caring even, but together they began to feel like guidance meant to steer me rather than assist me. Mom, Adrian said one afternoon while helping me pay bills online, you have so many accounts. Have you considered consolidating them? It would make it easier to manage and prevent mistakes. I shook my head. I like things the way they are, I said calmly. Of course. He said smoothly, I just thought it might save you some effort. Less chance of missing something important. Camille, standing nearby, chimed in almost automatically. Mom, it's fine. It's just easier if he helps. I allowed it, trusting both of them. I wanted to trust. I wanted to believe in their intentions. And I did, even as I began noticing small discrepancies, tiny details that seemed slightly off. The transfers he suggested always felt temporary, just until next week. Just to cover this expense. I complied, assuming I was helping family, never imagining that these small, innocent-seeming movements were laying the groundwork for something far more serious. As weeks passed, Adrian's requests increased in both frequency and scope. He began suggesting larger transfers, framed as temporary solutions to urgent matters, unexpected home repairs, business opportunities for Camille, emergencies he never fully detailed. Each time I agreed, trusting the framing of necessity. Each time, I told myself I was helping. Each time, I felt proud to support my family. But the quiet unease persisted. A glance here, a hesitant word there, the slight way Adrian would linger, measuring the effect of his suggestions. Camille's supportive nods seemed automatic, almost rehearsed, and I failed to notice how much influence he was quietly asserting. One evening, I realized I had let him log into my online accounts for safekeeping. He claimed it was just for convenience, but I began to see how much control he now held over the smallest details of my financial life. Every deposit, every payment, every transfer, he knew it all. I had opened the door, thinking it was harmless, and now it was a threshold I could not easily close. It was the subtleties that were most dangerous. Not the amounts he requested, not the words he spoke, but the way he framed everything as concern, as necessity, as family. Mom, you've worked your entire life, he would say softly. You deserve to have everything protected. I just want to help. And Camille, with her gentle voice, added, Mom, it's nothing to worry about, just temporary. He's only looking out for us. I nodded. I complied. I trusted. Then came the weekend before the family reunion. Adrian suggested that I move a slightly larger sum to cover a temporary business opportunity for Camille. It's only for a short time, he explained. We'll return it as soon as possible. You're doing the right thing. I hesitated briefly, feeling the flicker of doubt, the whisper of caution. But Camille, ever reassuring, smiled. Mom, it's okay. It's just temporary. We're fine. And so I transferred the money, a larger sum than ever before, and I felt that familiar mix of pride and trust. Believing I had done the right thing, I noticed how skillful Adrian was, how carefully he built trust and compliance without ever demanding it, without ever appearing forceful. Each small step seemed reasonable, helpful, and necessary, and yet, each step pulled me further into a position where I was no longer fully in control. The family reunion came, and with it, the culmination of weeks, months, and subtle manipulations. The laughter, the celebrations, the friendly conversations, they all masked the growing tension beneath. Adrian was attentive, charming, and polite, as always. Camille was present, gentle, encouraging, and I, Loretta James, believed in them both, unaware that the careful control, the subtle guidance, and the gentle pressures had been quietly orchestrated to position me for the eventual collapse that would follow. By the end of that weekend, I would begin to realize just how much influence had been quietly exerted over my life, my finances, and my trust. And that realization would hit me hard, a storm breaking over the calm sea of my carefully managed world. The morning of the family reunion arrived with a strange mix of warmth and tension. Sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, glinting on the polished countertops where I had spent years carefully keeping everything in order. For weeks, I had felt the subtle unease in Adrian's presence, the small nudges, the gentle guidance disguised as concern, the careful orchestration of trust. And now, it would all come to a head. Camille was excited, radiant even, as she moved around the house getting ready. "Mom, everything will be fine," she said with her characteristic soft confidence. "They're just family, and we're all together. It'll be lovely." Her voice carried reassurance, but there was a nervous tremor beneath the surface that I noticed only because I had come to know her so well. Adrian, ever composed, was meticulously reviewing the final details of the evening. "Loretta, the gift you prepared for my parents, it's perfect," he said, handing it to me. "And I've double-checked everything for the dinner. We don't want any mistakes." His voice was calm, polite, seemingly innocent. But in the quiet moments, I sensed the careful control he exerted over every element, as though the entire event was a chessboard and we were pieces he moved strategically. As we drove to the venue, I watched Camille in the passenger seat. She seemed cheerful, her hair catching the sunlight, her hands lightly gripping the seatbelt. I wanted to tell her everything I had noticed, everything I had begun to suspect, but I didn't. She trusted Adrian. She trusted him implicitly, and I did not want to shatter her trust or the excitement of the evening. The restaurant was a grand place, warm lighting casting soft shadows across the polished tables. We were shown to a private dining room where Adrian's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Cole, were already seated. They rose as we entered, smiling broadly. Handshakes exchanged with a polite formality that masked something deeper. "Loretta, so glad you could join us," said Mrs. Cole, her smile wide, eyes sharp. "Camille has told us so much about you." I smiled politely, extending my hand. "It's a pleasure to be here." Adrian's father, tall and imposing, gave me a nod, and for a moment, I felt the weight of scrutiny. The air was thick with expectation, and I realized quickly that this was more than a casual family dinner. Every word, every gesture would be measured, evaluated, and judged. The conversation began with light pleasantries, but the subtle tension was already present. Questions about my life, my career, my home, and my routines were peppered with thinly veiled assumptions. "Loretta," Mr. Cole asked, "you've always managed on your own, I hear. How do you afford such a lifestyle?" I smiled gently, choosing my words carefully. "I've lived simply by choice," I said. "I value peace, dignity, and independence more than appearances or status." Mrs. Cole laughed softly, though there was a trace of derision. "Of course, but it must be difficult. Sometimes, you know, managing everything without support." I nodded, keeping my composure. "It has its challenges, yes, but I've always believed in doing what's right, in living authentically." Camille squeezed my hand subtly under the table, a quiet gesture of support. Adrian's eyes met mine, briefly calm, measured, as if to silently remind me to stay composed. As the dinner progressed, the comments grew sharper, though always framed politely. Subtle judgments about my clothes, my choice of table manners, the simplicity of my gift. "It's charming," Mrs. Cole said of my carefully wrapped present, "but perhaps not what one might expect at a celebration of this scale." I kept my voice soft, steady. "It comes from the heart," I said. "That is always what matters most." The tension was palpable, a quiet undercurrent beneath the polite conversation. I noticed the way Adrian's parents measured every word, how their smiles sometimes flickered with impatience. Camille's hand remained in mine, her thumb brushing softly against my skin, grounding me. And then came the moment that would change everything. Adrian's father, Mr. Cole, reached for his credit card to settle the dinner. There was a pause, a polite smile, and then a quiet murmur. The card was declined. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Mrs. Cole's smile faltered, the carefully constructed image of wealth and control cracking ever so slightly. Adrian's calm demeanor wavered, a micro-expression, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. I remained composed, feeling a strange sense of detachment. This was not my humiliation. This was not a moment for anger. This was truth. The veneer of authority, status, and superiority that they had maintained for so long had collapsed in a quiet, devastating instant. Perhaps there's a mistake? Mrs. Cole said, her voice tight, measured. I leaned forward slightly, speaking softly but firmly. Sometimes appearances can be misleading. True value isn't measured by cards, accounts, or status. It's measured by honesty, integrity, and how we treat one another. There was a silence so deep it felt almost tangible. Camille's eyes were wide, a mix of shock and awe. Adrian's jaw tightened, his hand gripping the table. The room felt heavy with the weight of the truth I had just spoken. Mrs. Cole's lips pressed into a thin line. I don't believe you understand, she began, but I held my gaze, steady and unwavering. I understand perfectly, I said, softly. I understand that wealth does not equal worth, that appearances can deceive, that true respect is earned, not assumed. Adrian's father's hand trembled slightly as he replaced the declined card. His composure, so carefully maintained, was gone. The polite mask had slipped, revealing frustration, disbelief, and perhaps for a brief moment, shame. Camille's voice, small but resolute, broke the tension. Mom is right, she said. We've been taught that appearances matter, but they don't. Not truly. What matters is honesty, love, and respect. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Words were exchanged in quiet murmurs. The staff brought alternate payment methods. Adrian's parents tried to maintain dignity, but their carefully constructed facade was gone. Camille and I remained, calm, grounded, quietly victorious. As we left the restaurant, I felt an unusual lightness. Not embarrassment, not shame, but liberation. Free from the need to pretend, free from the pressure of appearances, free from tolerating disrespect. On the drive home, Camille reached over and squeezed my hand. Mom, I'm proud of you, she said softly. Her voice trembled, but it was filled with sincerity. Adrian remained silent, his expression unreadable, but I sensed a shift in the air, the subtle recognition that the dynamics had changed. That night, I reflected on the entire evening, on the calm way I had spoken, the quiet strength I had maintained, on the values I had lived by: simplicity, honesty, dignity, and how they had guided me through a situation designed to intimidate and belittle. I realized that true wealth is not measured by money or possessions. It is measured by character, by integrity, by the courage to stand firm in the face of judgment. Camille slept peacefully beside me, unaware of how deeply her mother's quiet strength had influenced her that night. Adrian remained at her side, composed yet altered, silently recalibrating the rules he thought he controlled. By the end of part 5, the stage was set. The subtle manipulations, the quiet judgments, the controlled appearances, all of it had been confronted, exposed, and quietly defeated by nothing more than honesty, composure, and integrity. And while the events of that evening were challenging, even painful to witness, they also offered a profound truth: that a life lived with dignity, peace, and self-respect cannot be undermined by deception or intimidation. The morning after the family reunion, the house felt unusually quiet. The laughter, polite small talk, and the faint hum of tension that had filled the restaurant were gone, replaced by the stillness of reality settling in. I, Loretta James, sat at the edge of my bed, hands folded in my lap, thinking about the evening before. Even as I replayed the event, a strange sense of liberation coursed through me, mingled with sadness for the truths revealed and the realization of the hidden dynamics I had only now fully perceived. Camille was still asleep in her room, exhausted from the emotional intensity of the evening. I had watched her carefully, her small, peaceful movements, the rise and fall of her chest. I marveled at how such a young woman could carry so much grace, even in the face of tension and conflict. I realized then how much of my life had been dedicated to shaping this kind of strength in her, to ensuring she could face life with dignity, even when confronted with unfairness or cruelty. Adrian, ever composed, had been quietly present throughout the evening. I could see his subtle recalibration of behavior, the polite mask still intact, but with a flicker of discomfort now evident beneath the surface. His parents, the Cools, had retreated in the aftermath of their public embarrassment. The carefully constructed image of wealth and superiority momentarily shattered. And yet, I sensed that their pride would not allow them to reflect openly. Instead, they would retreat, simmering in private, their sense of control diminished but not entirely broken. I poured a cup of tea, the steam rising gently, curling into the soft morning light. I sat by the window, gazing at the garden outside. The flowers, still wet from morning dew, seemed untouched by human conflict, living simply, naturally, freely. And I understood, more clearly than ever, that the values I had tried to instill in Camille, honesty, kindness, self-respect, were the ones that endured, even when confronted by wealth, status, or manipulation. My thoughts drifted back to the dinner. I had remained calm, composed, unwavering. I had chosen words carefully, speaking the truth without accusation, maintaining dignity even when their polite veneer cracked. And that, I realized, was my true victory, not in humiliating anyone, not in forcing apologies, but in standing firm in my own values, in protecting my peace, and in showing Camille that respect is never conditional upon wealth or appearance. Camille eventually emerged from her room, brushing sleep from her eyes. "Mom," she said softly, "I couldn't sleep after last night. I kept thinking about everything that happened." Her voice trembled, carrying the weight of her emotions: confusion, relief, admiration, and the quiet recognition of her mother's strength. I reached out, taking her hands in mine. "Camille, everything that happened, it was necessary. Not to hurt anyone, but to show the truth, to reveal what lies beneath appearances. Sometimes the people we love can be blinded by their own beliefs, their own pride. And when that happens, we cannot fight with anger. We fight with honesty, patience, and integrity." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand, Mom, but it hurts, knowing how much they tried to control everything, even you." I smiled softly, brushing a stray hair from her face. "Control is an illusion. True power is in knowing who you are, what you value, and standing by it quietly, without needing others to approve or understand. That is the lesson I hope you carry forward." The rest of the day was spent in reflection. I walked through the house, noticing every detail: the neatness of the kitchen, the small cracks in the wall I had always ignored, the familiar hum of the refrigerator. Each mundane object became a symbol of continuity, of the stability I had built with my own hands. And in that reflection, I understood the depth of my resilience. I had faced manipulation, subtle pressure, and the quiet judgment of others. And yet, I remained whole, unbroken, and at peace with myself. Camille joined me in the garden, sitting quietly beside me. "Mom, what do you think will happen now?" she asked, her voice soft. "With Adrian's parents?" "With Adrian?" I considered the question carefully. "People will respond in the way that aligns with their values," I said. "Some will retreat, some will resist, and some will never understand. What matters is how we respond. We choose dignity, honesty, and love. That is our path. Others' choices are their own, but they cannot take from us what we have already built within ourselves." We sat in silence, the garden humming softly with life. A gentle breeze stirred the flowers, carrying the faint scent of roses and fresh earth. I realized then that the events of the evening had clarified so much. The world often places importance on appearances, on control, on status. But real wealth is in peace, integrity, and the ability to stand firmly in your own truth. Later, as the afternoon sun waned, I received a text from Adrian. It was brief, polite, careful. "Thank you for your patience and composure last night. We'll speak soon." I did not respond immediately. I did not feel the need to. The message held no threat, no manipulation, only the polite distance he always maintained. And that was enough for me. I did not need his approval. I did not need his permission. I only needed the certainty that I had acted in alignment with my values, and that Camille had witnessed the same. Camille and I spent the evening reviewing small household tasks together, folding laundry, preparing dinner, arranging flowers, the ordinary rhythm of life grounding us. And in each task, I felt a quiet affirmation. Life continues, integrity remains, and peace can be maintained even amidst external chaos. Before bed, Camille hugged me tightly. "Mom, I'm so grateful for you," she whispered. "For your calm, your wisdom, your strength. I don't know how I would have understood all of this without you." I held her close, feeling the warmth of her presence, the trust she placed in me. "Camille," I said softly, "you're stronger than you know. You've always been aware, perceptive, and kind. What you learned last night is simply the reinforcement of what you already possess. Remember, true wealth lies not in money, not in possessions, but in how you live your life, how you love, and how honestly you stand in your own truth." The day drew to a close. I sat by the window, watching the sky darken, the last light of day spilling over the horizon. Stars began to appear, faint glimmers against the deepening blue. I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not for wealth, not for status, but for clarity, for peace, for the enduring bond between Camille and myself. Even as the quiet of night settled over the house, I knew that the lessons of the evening would ripple forward. Adrian's subtle manipulations, the quiet judgments of his parents, the careful orchestration of appearances all had been met with patience, integrity, and strength. And I understood, finally, that life's true victories are often quiet, unseen by the world, yet deeply felt in the heart. I reflected on the contrast between what is fleeting wealth, appearances, control, and what is enduring love, respect, truth, and the courage to stand unwavering in one's values. And I felt an unexpected lightness, a sense of freedom, as if a weight had been lifted. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to simply breathe, to exist without expectation, without pretense, and without fear. The night passed quietly. Camille slept peacefully, and I remained awake for a while, seated by the window, watching the stars. I thought about the events, the lessons, and the clarity that had emerged. I realized that the world would always have people who judge, manipulate, or measure worth by appearances. But I had learned, and now Camille had learned, that such forces cannot touch the essence of one's life if it is grounded in integrity, honesty, and love. And in that moment, Loretta James understood a simple, profound truth. The calm, measured life I had chosen, the care with which I had raised my daughter, and the courage to act with dignity had created a shield that no external force could penetrate. We had emerged stronger, wiser, and more at peace. The morning after the reunion, I woke to the soft glow of sunlight spilling across the bedroom. The world outside seemed ordinary, yet inside, the echoes of the previous night lingered, persistent and heavy. Camille was already awake, sitting at the edge of her bed, her hands clasped tightly together, eyes reflecting both concern and newfound determination. "Mom," she whispered, almost hesitantly, "we need to talk." I nodded, setting aside the cup of tea I had brought with me. "Of course, Camille. What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling with the weight of her thoughts. "I can't stop thinking about last night, about Adrian and how he and his parents behaved. I realized I've been so conditioned to follow, to accept, that I didn't even question him before. I let him take control in ways I should have noticed." Her words were quiet but deliberate, a reflection of both clarity and regret. I reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "Camille, you've always been perceptive. Sometimes it just takes an event like this to bring clarity. The important thing is that you recognize it now, and that you choose how to respond from this moment forward." Her eyes glistened with emotion. "I want to confront him, Mom. I want to make it clear that control and manipulation won't work anymore. But I'm scared. I don't want to ruin what we have, or make things worse. I took a moment to consider my words. Confrontation doesn't always mean conflict, I said softly. It means establishing boundaries. It means communicating your values clearly and calmly. You can do it with respect, without anger. That is true strength. She nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. I've spent so much of my life doing what I thought was right because of them. I never realized I was obeying fear and guilt, not love. You're learning now, I said, brushing a stray hair from her face. And that's what matters. You have the power to decide, going forward, how you will live, and what kind of family environment you will allow. No one else can take that from you. Camille spent the morning in quiet reflection. She paced the living room, occasionally glancing out the window at the street below. I watched her with a mixture of pride and empathy. To see her grappling with these revelations, to witness her transition from compliance to assertiveness was profoundly moving. Finally, she sat down at the kitchen table, pen and notebook in hand. Mom, I think I need to write everything down, she said. Every time Adrian tried to steer me, every subtle suggestion from his parents, I need to see it all clearly so I can respond properly. I nodded approvingly. Writing helps clarify the mind. It allows you to separate emotion from fact, to see the pattern, and to plan a course that aligns with your values. She began writing, and as she did, I could see her confidence slowly returning. Her posture straightened, her eyes sharpened, and her voice gained a quiet authority. I realize now, she said after a pause, that I don't have to obey blindly. I can choose love without submission. I can respect my parents-in-law without sacrificing my dignity. The afternoon was spent in preparation. Camille rehearsed conversations in hushed tones, imagining different scenarios with Adrian. I provided guidance, offering gentle suggestions without dictating her words, allowing her to find her own voice. Remember, I said, you don't have to justify yourself endlessly. You only need to state clearly what is acceptable and what is not. Confidence in your values is your shield. Calmness in your delivery is your strength. By early evening, Camille was ready. She took a deep breath and asked me to accompany her to the living room, where Adrian was quietly reviewing documents. He looked up, smiling politely, as if nothing had happened. But Camille's presence, her determined posture, immediately set the tone. Adrian, she began, her voice steady, I need to talk to you about the way things have been handled recently. The influence you and your parents have exerted over my decisions and over my mother has gone too far. It's time we establish boundaries. Adrian's smile did not falter, but I saw the slight tightening of his jaw, the subtle narrowing of his eyes. Camille continued, unwavering. We can no longer allow subtle manipulations or suggestions to control our choices. We are grateful for your support when it is helpful, but guidance that attempts to dictate our actions is unacceptable. He opened his mouth, perhaps to argue, perhaps to charm, but Camille held her ground. Mom has always acted with integrity and independence. I now realize I must do the same. We will no longer accept control disguised as concern. The room was quiet, the weight of Camille's words settling like a heavy curtain. Adrian's composed mask remained, but the flicker of acknowledgement was there, almost imperceptible. He understood that the dynamics had shifted, that his subtle influence had been recognized and challenged. Afterwards, Camille and I sat together, reflecting on the conversation. Mom, she said softly, it was difficult, but I feel liberated. I finally see that love does not mean submission, and respect does not require obedience. I nodded, feeling the profound truth of her words. You've taken the first step in breaking the cycle. Boundaries are the foundation of healthy relationships. Once established, they protect both you and those you love. They allow for trust without control, affection without fear. That night, we discussed Adrian's parents, their reactions, their likely attempts at emotional manipulation, and the ways Camille could respond calmly without compromising her values. We planned scenarios, rehearsed responses, and envisioned future family interactions with clarity and confidence. Camille's transformation was remarkable. Over the course of the evening, I observed a shift not only in her understanding but in her posture, her confidence, and the way she held her head. She was no longer the compliant daughter-in-law, quietly absorbing others' judgments. She was a young woman asserting her values with quiet authority, guided by the lessons she had observed in me throughout her life. By the end of part 7, a subtle yet undeniable change had occurred in the family dynamic. Adrian's influence was no longer unquestioned. Camille had claimed her voice, and I had witnessed the power of integrity and quiet strength in effect. The evening closed with a calm reflection between mother and daughter. We sat together by the window, the soft hum of the city outside a reminder that life continued, relentless and impartial. Yet within our home, we had created a space of clarity, honesty, and mutual respect, a sanctuary where our values were honored and our voices heard. And in that quiet moment, I realized the depth of what had transpired. Confrontation does not need to be loud or aggressive. True confrontation is about clarity, boundaries, and steadfastness in one's values. Camille had demonstrated courage, Adrian had been challenged, and the family structure had subtly, irrevocably shifted. The days following the confrontation felt like a quiet storm settling into clarity. The tension that had weighed on the household during the reunion slowly began to dissipate, but its echoes remained, reminding us that something fundamental had shifted. I, Loretta James, watched Camille navigate the aftermath with a mixture of pride and cautious optimism. She was learning the true meaning of strength, that it wasn't loud or aggressive, but quiet, resolute, and grounded in integrity. Camille moved through the house differently now. Her posture was straighter, her steps more deliberate, her voice carrying a new confidence when speaking to Adrian or even to her father-in-law. She greeted the morning with purpose, preparing breakfast and tidying the house with a calm efficiency that reflected her inner growth. I observed her carefully, knowing that these subtle changes were the outward signs of her evolving mindset. "Mom," she said one morning, placing a cup of tea in front of me, "I feel lighter. I no longer feel the constant pressure to comply or to perform. I see the patterns clearly now." I smiled, touched by her insight. "Camille, what you're feeling is the freedom that comes from establishing your boundaries. It is the peace of knowing you do not need to justify yourself or bend to someone else's expectations. That clarity is a gift one you have earned by standing firm in your values." Adrian, meanwhile, was more reserved than usual. His usual calm, controlled demeanor remained, but there was a subtle change, a quiet acknowledgement that his influence was no longer absolute. He approached conversations with more caution, listening more than directing, offering suggestions without attempting to dominate. I sensed his awareness of the shift, though he did not speak of it openly. We spent long afternoons in the garden, Camille and I, discussing life, values, and the lessons gleaned from the recent events. She asked questions, some hesitant, others probing, about the nature of respect, love, and personal autonomy. I answered each one patiently, sharing insights from my own life while allowing her to form her own understanding. "Mom, I realized that for so long I believed love meant obedience," she admitted, her fingers tracing patterns on the tabletop. "I thought respecting Adrian's family meant agreeing with everything, even when it felt wrong. But now I see that love does not require submission. Respect does not require compromise of self." I nodded, my heart swelling with pride. "Exactly, Camille. True respect and love are built on mutual understanding, honesty, and trust. They do not thrive in fear or under manipulation. What you are learning now will guide you in every relationship you have moving forward." As the week progressed, we encountered moments that tested these new dynamics. Adrian would occasionally suggest decisions or offer advice in ways that previously would have caused Camille to defer, but now she responded calmly, assertively, yet respectfully. "I appreciate your input, Adrian, but I've decided on a different approach," she would say, her tone firm but not confrontational. I watched these interactions with quiet satisfaction. Each exchange reinforced her confidence and the lessons she had absorbed. It was clear that the family dynamic had irrevocably changed, no longer dominated by subtle control, but guided by mutual respect and acknowledgement of personal autonomy. One afternoon, Camille and I took a long walk in the park. The air was crisp, and the sunlight filtered through the branches, casting dappled shadows on the path. We observed families, couples, and individuals enjoying the day, laughing, sharing, and living in simple harmony. Mom, Camille said thoughtfully, seeing all this, it reminds me that life doesn't have to be complicated. People can be happy without wealth, without appearances, without control. Happiness is found in small, honest moments. I smiled, reflecting on my own life and the choices I had made. That is true, Camille. Simplicity and authenticity often bring more peace than the trappings of status or material wealth. Real wealth is not in what you possess, but in the integrity of your actions, the honesty of your heart, and the strength of your character. Later that day, we returned home to a quiet house. Adrian was reviewing work documents in the study, his presence calm but measured. Camille approached him, confident, yet composed. Adrian, I want us to continue building our relationship on mutual respect and understanding. We will no longer accept subtle control or manipulations. Our family will operate with honesty and openness. He nodded slowly, a trace of acknowledgement passing across his features. He did not argue, did not attempt to dominate. The quiet recognition in his eyes told me that he understood the shift, that Camille's voice was no longer overshadowed, and that the dynamics of influence had changed forever. Over the next few days, Camille and I reflected on the reunion and its aftermath. We discussed the lessons learned, the personal growth experienced, and the ways in which these insights could shape future interactions with family and friends. Each conversation strengthened her confidence and reinforced the values we held dear: integrity, honesty, and self-respect. One evening, Camille asked, Mom, do you think Adrian's parents will ever understand? I considered the question carefully. Perhaps not fully, Camille. Some people are limited by their own experiences, their own beliefs. But it doesn't matter whether they understand completely. What matters is that we live according to our values, with dignity and clarity. Understanding from others is a gift, not a requirement. Camille nodded, absorbing the wisdom. I see. It's not about making them see things our way. It's about standing firm in what we believe, regardless of whether they agree. Exactly, I said softly. And that is how true peace is maintained, not by convincing the world, but by aligning with your own integrity. As the week drew to a close, we prepared for a quiet dinner at home. The table was simple, adorned with a few flowers and soft candlelight. Camille set the plates with care, her movements calm and deliberate. Adrian joined us, polite and attentive, a subtle acknowledgement of the shift in dynamics. During dinner, conversation flowed naturally. We spoke of everyday matters, shared observations, and even laughed softly at small anecdotes. The atmosphere was relaxed, devoid of tension, yet enriched with the quiet strength that comes from clarity and mutual respect. After the meal, Camille and I sat together by the window, watching the evening sky deepen to a rich indigo hue. The stars began to appear, faint but persistent, much like the lessons we had absorbed and the values we had reinforced. Mom, Camille said, her voice barely above a whisper, I feel stronger. I feel like I can face anything now, without fear or hesitation. I took her hand gently, feeling the warmth of her grasp. You can, Camille. You always could. You simply needed to see the truth clearly and trust in yourself. That strength has always been within you. As the night grew deeper, we reflected on the events that had shaped us. The reunion, the confrontations, the subtle challenges all had served as catalysts for growth. We had emerged more confident, more self-aware, and more grounded in the principles that guided our lives. And in that quiet evening, Loretta James understood a profound truth. Real strength is quiet. It does not seek recognition or approval. It stands firm, guided by integrity, patience, and love. And the bonds forged through honesty and respect are far stronger than any relationship maintained through fear, control, or manipulation.
The days following the reunion passed in a strange mixture of calm and tension. The air in our home felt lighter, yet the echoes of what had happened still lingered. Loretta James, watched Camille as she navigated this delicate aftermath. She was no longer timid, no longer quietly apologizing for things that were not her fault. Instead, she carried herself with quiet strength, the kind that comes from finally recognizing your own worth. "Mom," Camille said one morning as she poured herself tea, "I feel different, lighter somehow. I can think without that constant pressure weighing on me." I nodded, seeing the subtle shift in her posture. "You're learning what freedom feels like," I replied. "It's not loud or flashy. It is quiet, grounded, and steady." Adrian, too, was changing. He approached our conversations more thoughtfully, pausing before speaking, listening more than instructing. I could see the subtle acknowledgement in his eyes. He understood that the family dynamics had shifted, even if he did not yet fully grasp how permanent that shift might be. We knew that facing Adrian's parents was inevitable. Clarence and Lorraine Cole were formidable, a blend of charm and intimidation, and their approval had always been a subtle force in Camille's life. But the events of the reunion had exposed them. Their behavior could no longer be ignored or quietly endured. The day came when Camille decided she would call her parents-in-law. I listened as she dialed the number, her hand steady, her voice calm. The conversation was tense but measured. She set the tone immediately, explaining that their interference, manipulation, and disrespect were unacceptable. She asked for boundaries, to be recognized. "Mom," she said softly after hanging up, "I think they understand, but they're not happy. They're resistant, but I feel proud." Finally, I'm speaking without fear. I reached over and held her hand. "That is courage, Camille. True courage, not the kind that yells, not the kind that retaliates, the kind that simply refuses to be diminished." Adrian entered the room quietly. "You handled that well," he said, voice low. "I think they realize that you won't bend anymore." She looked at him, eyes steady. "It's not about bending. It's about respect. If they want to be in our lives, it will be on our terms. Otherwise, we don't need their approval." That was a defining moment. Camille had drawn a line, and Adrian had supported it. It was the first time I saw them truly aligned as partners, standing together instead of one protecting the other. In the following days, we watched the Cole family struggle with this new dynamic. Clarence and Lorraine were forced to confront the limits of their control. Every attempt at emotional manipulation, hints, veiled criticisms, or threats was met with calm, unwavering boundaries from Camille and Adrian. "It's incredible," Camille said one afternoon, sitting with me in the garden. "I used to think their anger meant I was wrong. Now I see it means they are afraid of losing control." I smiled. Fear often disguises itself as authority, but authority without respect is empty. Camille began to reclaim her time, her voice, and her decisions. She started small, choosing her meals, planning outings, deciding on home decor, simple acts that had previously been influenced or dictated by the Cole family. Each choice was a victory, a reminder that autonomy is earned through practice. Adrian, too, began reflecting. He recognized how deeply his upbringing had shaped his reactions. The need to please his parents, the fear of disappointing them, the automatic deference, all of it had unconsciously influenced his behavior toward Camille. Watching her assert herself forced him to examine his own patterns. One evening, we sat around the dining table for a quiet family dinner. The conversation flowed naturally, free of the previous tension that had haunted our interactions. Adrian listened to Camille's ideas and responded thoughtfully. He asked her opinion first. He deferred respectfully. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. "Mom," Camille said later, as we cleaned up together, "I feel like we've changed the rules. Not with anger, not with confrontation. Just by being honest, calm, and consistent." I nodded. "That is the power of boundaries. They are not walls to separate people. They are the lines that define where respect begins." The next confrontation came when Clarence and Lorraine attempted to assert financial control. They called unexpectedly, suggesting Camille and Adrian consider their advice on investments and spending. But Camille answered calmly, clearly, and firmly. "Thank you for your concern," she said, "but Adrian and I have made decisions together. We will not take further advice unless we ask for it." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, a hesitant acknowledgement. Camille hung up and exhaled. "It's exhausting, but it works," she said. "Every time we stay calm, they lose a little of that grip." I watched her with admiration. The growth was not instantaneous. It was slow, uneven, and real, but it was happening. Camille's voice had returned, and Adrian was learning to listen instead of dominate. We spent afternoons reflecting together. I reminded her that boundaries were not punishments, they were protection. Protection of dignity, self-worth, and peace. Adrian understood too. He saw how much Camille had carried silently and how those patterns could no longer continue. Through the weeks, the Cole family's responses varied. Sometimes they attempted guilt, other times, subtle reminders of past favors or sacrifices. But Camille and Adrian remained steadfast, calm, consistent, unyielding yet respectful. One night, Camille approached me in my room. "Mom," she said softly, "I think I understand now. They are not angry because we are wrong. They are angry because they cannot control us anymore." "That is exactly right," I replied. "The ones who fear change often mistake independence for defiance." Camille smiled faintly. "I feel powerful, not in a cruel way, just alive, finally in charge of my own life." And that, I realized, was the greatest victory. Not money recovered, not apologies forced, but the reclamation of self, the ability to make choices without fear, the clarity that dignity can never be taken, only surrendered, and we were no longer surrendering. The house felt lighter with each passing day. Conversations became collaborative, decisions were mutual. Trust between Camille and Adrian deepened because it was now built on honesty, not fear or deference. I often found myself reflecting on the lessons of the past. How many of us endure small injustices in silence, hoping that patience will earn respect? How many of us shrink ourselves, giving away parts of our soul to maintain appearances? And yet, it takes just one moment, one clear, calm refusal to continue old patterns to start the shift. Camille's journey had taught me that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it sits quietly and says, "This is where I stand, and I will not move." By the end of the month, the Cole family had begun to recognize the limits of their influence. Not fully, not willingly, but undeniably. Camille and Adrian had created a space where respect was required for engagement, and that space became sacred. We spent evenings in quiet reflection. I encouraged Camille to journal her thoughts, to express the emotions that had been bottled for years. She wrote about fear, disappointment, courage, and pride. Through writing, she processed not only the events but the lessons that would guide her for the rest of her life. Adrian also reflected privately. He began understanding that respect is not optional in love. He began to see how his silence in the past had allowed patterns of control to persist. And though the path forward would still require effort, the awareness itself was transformative. And so, slowly, gently, our household found balance again. Not perfect, not without challenges, but grounded in honesty, mutual respect, and personal integrity. Camille's voice had returned. Adrian's awareness had grown. And I, Loretta James, could finally breathe a little easier, knowing that the lessons of the past were becoming the foundation of a healthier, more authentic family.
The house feels quiet tonight. Not the kind of quiet that hurts. Not the kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. This quiet feels gentle, like a soft blanket resting over tired shoulders. I am sitting by the window with a cup of tea in my hands. The sky outside is dark blue, almost black. A few stars are visible between slow-moving clouds. The world feels still. Camille is in her room, sketching again. I can hear the faint scratch of her pencil against paper. That sound brings me comfort. It reminds me that she is finding herself again. Slowly, steadily, Adrian is in the living room. Reading, not pacing, not arguing, just reading. Things are not perfect, but they are honest. And sometimes, honesty is the greatest peace a family can reach. I think back to that day after the family reunion. The shock, the disbelief, the words that felt so cold. We needed it more than you. Those words could have broken something forever. But instead, they revealed something. They revealed where the cracks already were. Money can be replaced. Pride can heal. Even trust, with time and effort, can grow again. But self-worth, that must be protected at all costs. I look at my hands wrapped around my cup and realize something important. If that moment had never happened, Camille might still be shrinking herself. She might still be apologizing for things that were never her fault. She might still be handing over pieces of her independence in the name of keeping peace. Sometimes the hardest moments are not punishments, they are awakenings. A few days ago, Camille sat beside me on the same couch. Mom, she said softly, I don't hate him. I nodded. I know. I just don't want to disappear again. Her voice was calm, not angry, not bitter, just clear. And I told her something I wish someone had told me when I was her age. You are allowed to love someone and still require respect. Love without respect is not love. It is control wearing a gentle mask. Camille understands that now. Adrian understands it too. At least he is beginning to. Change does not happen in grand speeches. It happens in daily choices, in small pauses before speaking, in asking instead of assuming, in listening instead of correcting. I have seen him try. I have seen him stop himself mid-sentence and say, What do you think, Camille? And I have seen her answer without fear. That is growth. Slow, uneven, real. Tonight, as I sit here, I realize something about myself as well. I used to believe my role was simply to endure, to support quietly, to smooth things over, to carry discomfort so others would not have to. But I was wrong. A mother's role is not to absorb injustice. It is to stand in truth. That day, when I refused to stay silent about the bank account, I was not creating conflict. I was protecting dignity. There's a difference. And I hope anyone listening understands that silence may feel easier in the moment. It avoids arguments. It avoids tension. It avoids uncomfortable conversations. But silence also feeds patterns that grow stronger in the dark. Truth may shake a room, but it also lets light in. I do not know what the future holds for Camille and Adrian. No one can promise forever. But I do know this. Camille knows who she is now. She knows her worth is not measured by how much she gives away. She knows her kindness does not require self-erasure. And she knows that love should feel safe. That is enough for me. If you are listening to this story and you see a part of yourself in it, I want you to remember something. You are not difficult for wanting respect. You are not selfish for protecting your boundaries. And you are not wrong for speaking up when something feels unfair. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is remain calm and still refuse to be diminished. I finish my tea and stand up slowly. The house creaks gently as it settles for the night. Camille steps out of her room and shows me her latest sketch. It is simple. A woman standing in soft light, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady. She looks peaceful, I say. Camille smiles. She's learning, she replies. I smile back. We are all learning. Learning that love must include honesty. Learning that respect must be mutual. Learning that strength does not have to be loud. And learning that sometimes what feels like loss is actually the beginning of freedom. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. If it touched your heart in any way, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps these stories reach others who may need them. And tell me, what lesson stayed with you the most?